Welcome to Licking Non-Vanilla, a sex-positive hour of talk about kink, sexual mores, and writing dirty words. So grab a cup of cocoa, your favorite easy chair, and the lube as we go sailing into the dark, sweet waters of all things naughty. On Licking Non-Vanilla with your hosts Ralph Greco Jr. and M. Christian.
Hey, my little droogs. Welcome back to the show we call Licking Non-Vanilla because we like chocolate. We like all flavors, actually. My name is Ralph Greco Jr. and sitting across the world from me, not the world, but a couple states away, is my good friend and partner in crime. Introduce yourself over there.
Hi, this is Chris from the wild and woolly wasteland of Eugene, Oregon.
And today, Chris and I are very lucky to be talking to Dr. Lori Beth Bisbey. And we were both on Lori's show, her podcast.
Yes.
Just recently. And you've heard her bumper on our show, actually. So, Lori, say hi and tell everybody about you.
Hey, I'm Dr. Lori Beth Bisbey. I'm a sex and intimacy coach and a psychologist and a podcaster and a writer. And the podcast that they were on is my erotica podcast, which is Dr. Lori Beth Bisbey's Erotic Library, which we are having a lot of fun with.
Yeah, Chris and I had a great time, didn't we, Chris?
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was absolutely lovely. I have to say, it's like, first of all, I was honored. And then second of all, it was so great chatting with you, and being able to read my story was really a delight.
I had such a good time, and I'm getting such good feedback from this. So people are having a lot of fun with this. And they're having so much fun with it that I'm thinking about doing a live event.
Wow.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
Let's get over there, Chris.
Yeah. Well, at the moment it'll be a virtual live event, but eventually it'll be an in-person.
Aww.
When the world opens up again.
You know what I found, Chris, when I was talking to Lori on my podcast with her, that she is from a town a stone's throw from where I live.
Yep, I grew up very close to him.
Oh my God, that's wild.
Yeah, I grew up very close to him. We're going to go to the diner next time I'm back.
Because you know when you're here, Chris, you have to go to a diner. Lori, you know what's interesting? I find that you have authors coming on and usually reading their work.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Chris did so very well. He's one of those people who does that expertly. Do you find sometimes that some authors come on that are not so good at doing that?
I've only actually had one situation where I thought that I wasn't terribly happy with the way the story was read.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If I'd have known beforehand, I would have asked the person for permission to read their work.
Okay, right.
And it is a skill. I've gotten much better at reading my own work. When I started out, it was not as dramatic. It was a kind of more monotone. And as I got used to the idea of reading, then it got more dramatic, and you got to hear the characters more and the inflection and the emotion in the work. And it's much better when you can do that.
Yeah, because I think we all know that, like you just said, it certainly is a skill, a certain skill to do this kind of a thing. In fact, I don't know if you and Chris are aware of it. I'm sure you both are. That one of Hollywood's most famous women actors started a podcast, a fictional podcast, this last week, and I happened to listen in on it. And I don't know if I want to dime her out who it is. And you could tell that she's a great actress. I don't know if she's up for the task of voice acting. It's a whole different thing.
Yep. It is, because...
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've always had the thing where it's like, it's very challenging because my speaking voice and my writing voice are very different.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, Chris, jump in here because I know you have a couple things you want to ask Lori about.
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to thank you once again because I thought that was absolutely delightful to do, and it's wonderful to know you. And I think probably more than anything, it's just like I want to sort of ask some questions about sexology, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Well, the big thing I want to say, this is something I've asked a couple of people, like my friend Dr. Amy Marsh, who I do Love's Outer Limits with, another podcast, is in what way do you see sex ed getting better, or is there still a lot of things we should be focusing on?
I'm afraid I think we still have a lot of work to do because we're still not educating kids. Mm-hmm. I spend a good portion of my time re-educating adults. And for the most part, adults are the one, parents are the ones who are educating their children, and they haven't had decent sex ed. So that tells you where we're at with kids. We certainly talk about more things than we used to. Consent is actually something people discuss. People discuss kink a bit more. They discuss alternate lifestyles and different sexualities and genders. But there isn't a sense of normality in these discussions. Like, they're often still very strained. Mm-hmm. And people don't want to own their own stuff either.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is a big problem.
Put it out there.
Yeah. I think that's a big problem.
Oh, I agree myself. I mean, it's like the one thing I've observed is like some of the even basics around sex is still a lot of ignorance around there.
Yes. Anatomy, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I've had women clients in their 60s and 70s that didn't know anything about their own clitoris.
My goodness.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, it's your own body and you don't know about it, because it's been stigmatized or you just haven't learned,
And I take out my little clitoris model so that they can see that the bit that they know about. Yes, I know. But the bit that they know about is the smallest bit, right? I mean, the clitoris is far bigger than the bit that you can see. And it amazes me. I mean, if a man doesn't know that, I'm not so surprised. But it amazes me that a woman has never been able to learn about there, because we, as you say, it's stigmatized. We still don't talk about it. We still don't talk about pleasure. So we're very clinical in what we talk about. And then there's also a kind of, titillating interest that comes out, but we don't talk about pleasure and we don't talk about why pleasure is so important. And I think that some of the reason that why we're still stuck with the lack of knowledge and some of the lack of depth in talking about sex and sexuality is that it's still coming out of a Judeo-Christian ethos. So there's people don't have another way to look at it. They're still looking at this as something that we're supposed to be ashamed about.
Right. And only used for procreation.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And then there goes first and foremost the problem with masturbation.
Mm-hmm.
For either men or women,
Yeah.
What would be the purpose? If you're reading and following a Judeo-Christian ethos, there would be no sense for masturbation. And I know for a fact I have friends that are my contemporaries, women friends who don't masturbate, never did. I find pretty wacky to think about, but they just were never really brought up into a mindset that that's okay. In fact, it was stigmatized.
And yet that's so strange because if you follow the Judeo-Christian ethos and you think about, God having created us in his image, then God created the parts that give us pleasure.
You would think.
But there's a good reason for that, because if you want people to procreate, then you've got to do something to get them to do it. And that means make it fun.
Right. Exactly. But only for procreation. It can only be fun when it leads to procreation.
Well, but I think that's a human literal interpretation of that. I think the idea is we want you to be fruitful and multiply, so we've made this fun so you'll do it a lot. And as long as you're in a marriage,
Yes.
a sanctioned relationship. In fact, in Judaism, sex in a marriage is considered a positive. It's a mitzvah. It's glory unto God, and it's not limited to procreation. Sex with your partner is part of the wondrous mysteries and the wondrous intimacy that God has given you as part of your relationship. So much so that if a man doesn't pleasure his wife, that's grounds for divorce.
There you go, Chris. You've been forewarned, Chris and I.
Right?
So, Lori, Chris and I both are wondering, because you're involved in a lot of stuff. What do you see yourself as first and foremost in a professional sense?
Specialized in gender, sex, and relationship diversity.
Okay.
That's LGBTQ, consensual non-monogamy, and BDSM and kink.
So you're really a therapist first and foremost, a scientist therapist first and foremost.
Probably.
Yeah. And what various degrees do you hold, if we don't mind, bragging
I've got a master's in clinical psychology, a PhD in clinical psychology, a coaching qualification. I'm an ACC coach with the ICF, and a diploma in forensic medicine and science.
Well, you're smart for a girl.
Yeah.
Wow. So, okay. So then I guess the next question is, because Chris and I both want to know this too. Then with all that going on, and having incredibly handsome and talented people on your show like Chris and I, what's the next step? Like, what do you see within the next year or 5 years of the future for yourself?
For me, I'm doing more and more speaking on larger and larger stages.
Okay.
I like doing media. I like television. I like radio. I like podcasting. Mm-hmm. So I want to do more media. I've got a couple of books out, but my most recent is my erotic memoir. I've got a companion self-help book to that coming out in a couple of months, and I've already got 2 other book projects sort of stacked up. So I'll still be doing individual work with people, but I want to reach larger and larger groups at once.
Right.
So more. So I like doing things like retreats and events where you can work with a group of people and really affect change.
Yeah, I got you. In large numbers, then, in other words.
Yeah.
Getting a whole bunch of people together. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, it is a lot of fun. So I like doing small, intimate events as well. But it's about working with more than one person at a time, because working one-to-one is a specific kind of work, and it's very labor-intensive, obviously.
Right. Yeah, Chris and I mean, Chris, we like as large a groups as possible to present in front of, right? I mean, that's always been our thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
I don't mind when I only have like 2 or 3 people, because it depends on the class, because sometimes it's actually easier. But by and large, it feels a little bit better. Like, oh, they like us. Yeah,
we're hams, so we're like standing on stage and being adored. Like, who doesn't? So that's one of the things.
You say who doesn't, but it's not for everyone.
Oh, no, that's true.
That's true. Who don't like that at all, and there's certainly lots of people in my profession who be like, "Oh no, please, no."
Oh yeah.
I started out doing broadcast journalism, so it's one of my loves. I love doing stuff like that, and I love to be up on stage and just have fun. To me, that's fun.
I think Chris and I have said this often. Like, what they say is the number one fear of some people, more than dying, is getting up and speaking in front of people, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, it's very common. It's a very common thing. People have a lot of anxiety around it.
Yeah, I think we've all conquered that. I know. Well, I come from a performing background, basically, so for me, it's not really that difficult, And I like you, I'm assuming, and I know, like Chris, I just really get off. No other term to use here on that. I hate to use the word energy because it sounds a little mystic, but. Mystical, but I do get off on that feedback from people, and it just fuels you.
I'll sound mystical. I love that energy. I think that energy is great. And there's an exchange back and forth between yourself and the audience. And it's exciting. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of fun. I get off on that as well. I do think that for some people, it's very easy. I think it's easier for people if they're okay with who they are.
That's probably true, right? Yeah.
So, I mean, none of us likes to bomb. None of us likes to have things not go over well. But if you're secure in who you are, and if people don't like you, then you kind of chalk it up to experience. You see if there's anything you could learn from it, and then you move on.
Right.
Whereas a lot of people get up on stage and they're not comfortable with who they are, and they're actually being someone else on stage. And I think that's actually a lot harder.
I think that's true. I mean, I think that the confidence level, and of course the confidence level increases the more you do it, like anything else, like when you say, Chris, the more you go down on women, the better you get at it, right?
Absolutely. I love it.
I think so.
You love its communication, of course, but yeah, it's like, with anything else, the more you do it, it's
Keep
something in writing. I mean, when you first start out, whatever you're going to do is going to suck. But the more you do it, better it is. And same thing with performing. When I first started to do it, I hated it, but now I've gotten a little bit more used to it.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of that. And if you start from a base of that, you like it. I mean, anything you do that you like, you're going to get, you tend to hopefully get better at it, So what other than the fact that we're not educated enough about sex, Lori, what would you say is the thing we're missing? Beyond that, just in general, what are we missing? Are we missing not being kind enough? Are we missing not touching enough? Are we missing fearing too much our fantasies? What are we missing mostly, you think?
I think we experience too much shame.
Okay.
And that shame gets in the way of all sorts of things. So because we experience too much shame, we're not owning our desires. Some of us aren't even looking for our desires.
So shame is getting in the way.
Shame gets in the way. I think that's one of the biggest problems that people have. And also that people don't, because of shame, they don't look on this as something exciting to explore.
Right. They say, that's true. I think some people think of it as a chore. Right, like sex. I got to get through this, which is, man, that's a bad attitude to have, right?
It's a horrible attitude to have.
Yeah, no, you're not getting anywhere
with
that.
But it's common.
Yeah, no,
really?
I think it is. It's like, oh well.
But if you think of it, if you've never enjoyed it, if you don't have any education about it, you don't know your own body. Or even if you do, so even for people who have learned how to masturbate, that doesn't necessarily mean that when they have sex with somebody else, that they have any way of connecting with that person. If they don't, they're embarrassed, they don't want to talk about it, so they're not telling their partner what they like.
Right.
So it's pure luck if they're actually getting off at all. Right?
Just kind of fall into it, luckily. Just I happen to roll into it. I got lucky, that's for sure,
Well, a lot of couples, that's how it works. I mean, I'm amazed how many people decide to fuck on the first date. I really am. Where they've never had a conversation about sex. They've just met. They may have just met and they've been out at a club all night. Right. And so they're kind of half drunk and not quite there. And they jump into bed with each other. And it's a wonder anybody has a good time when that happens.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the first encounter, you'll be like, I don't even know who this person is. I don't know what they want. I don't know. I have no clue,
I have no clue at all. Right. And unfortunately, this is because of the way we're educated, people don't stop and think, well, maybe I should have a conversation.
Right, yeah.
Like I should be really clear. I'm not judging people for jumping in bed with somebody on the first night or having one night stands. I don't judge anybody for that. I judge you if you don't have a conversation because you're not going to have a good time.
Right. And I'm saying, right. And you're saying there's going to be limitations to jumping into bed with somebody you don't know. Right? There's going to be some natural limitations that would be better served if you had a conversation at least.
Absolutely. But that also means you need to know what you like.
Yeah. Right.
You need to know what makes your body work. And that I'm not talking about the technical stuff. I'm talking about like, how can you get off?
Right. Yeah.
What is it that causes you to come?
Right.
What are the things you really like? Are there any sensations you really don't like? And then what do you want to explore? And if you know all of that and then you communicate all of that, the likelihood of you having a good time is much, much higher.
Right. Makes sense. Now, Chris, you and I were talking about this a couple shows ago, how there are differences in populations and cities and to kinks and all that kind of stuff. I think you remember that conversation.
Oh, yeah.
And knowing Lori a little bit as we do, we know she kind of gets around far and wide in the world of sexuality. So I'm going to ask her this one last question that may be interesting and then maybe complete bullshit. But anyway, because I've been known for that. But Lori, out of all the places you've been and the people you've encountered and across the wild world web, the interweb, the kids call it, have you seen populations or places that are better equipped to deal with these questions of sexuality than others? Is it culturally? Has to do with a landlocked country opposed to something else? I mean, do you think there's one or another?
Well, I do think that there's some cultures that have a harder time.
Okay.
There are very traditional cultures that have a harder time.
The traditional cultures, yeah.
They're still really steeped in shame, and the education is still poor.
Right.
And so that makes it more difficult. There are people who think that young people are having an easier time, but that's not been my experience. Although they talk about it more, they don't necessarily connect the dots.
I think that's true, Chris. What she's saying, that makes a lot of sense. That we tend to think the young people are hip and on top of this stuff. But I don't know if they are connecting the dots.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. I mean, I think some people are very well educated. Some kids are very well informed. But again, it has to do with the parents. Yeah. I used to answer kids' questions about sex. This is a long time ago. But I was always stunned by the level of ignorance. It's really quite scary.
They also have a weird problem, which is that a lot of their learning is coming from what they learn on the internet. So they're learning from pornography.
Right.
They're learning from people making pronouncements.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating to me to watch what happens. Of course, I'm part of this in terms of the sexuality movement, but
mm-hmm.
I find it really fascinating. So one person will say something on Instagram, and the next thing you know, everybody's got the same meme or the same pronouncement.
Right.
And some people think that's great because it means that you're passing the information along, and I do think that's a positive. But the negative to that is people don't think critically and think for themselves.
I know. I agree.
So all of a sudden, there's the one true way to do whatever, right? So, a few months ago, mindful sex.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody should have mindful sex.
Right.
Mindfulness is always good. Well, actually, there's a whole long discussion to be had about whether mindfulness is the only way to pay close observational attention,
mm-hmm.
and whether that method of doing it is always good. There are other methods of mindfulness is all about being able to be present in the now and in
right.
your body, right? There are other ways of doing that, and sometimes mindfulness isn't the way.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no room to have that discussion because this, right now it's the one true way, or this is the way to do BDSM. You
mm-hmm.
have to do it this way. It's like there as many people as there are different ways to do it.
Well, yeah, we say that all the time. Just there's no black and white to this stuff. There's muted areas and grays and purples and blush pinks and all that stuff and great wild red hair and all that stuff. And whatever it happens to be. I think that but that pendulum swings wide and it's like, well, that's the way we're doing it these days, and this is what we said. And don't question that because we went there. And that's the way. That's the pronouncement.
That's right.
And that's a little dangerous, I think.
I do too. And I think for me, that's it. More than any other thing, that's the issue that I have with what's going on when you look at sexology and the psychology of sex and coaching and all of that. Is that we're not really getting the message across to how individual things are,
right.
and that what you really want to be teaching people is how to explore themselves and how to pay attention to how they feel about something and how they know something's right for them. So that's all the stuff about being able to listen to your intuition and being able to understand when you do have a strong reaction to something, where that might come from.
Mm-hmm.
Listening to your own boundaries. I mean, and on the basic skills that if we gave people, they could all go off and be explorers.
Right. Yeah, they're not. So now we've covered a lot of ground here, Chris, and I could talk to Lori probably for hours. But Lori, do me a favor and shout out, and I'm gonna when we get this show up, I'll blog about it so people will see it written down. But shout out all the places and URLs people can find you so they can hear it.
Okay, so if you want my regular website, it's drloribethbisbey.com. if you want to see my new book and some of the other books that'll be on there shortly, it's drloribethbisbey.press.
Okay.
So that's LORIBETHBISBEY.
Oh, you know how to do that. That's very good. You know how to spell that. Look at you. I can't even spell my whole name, so yeah, that's very good.
I've learned. If you can go to atozofsex.com, so that's ATOZOFSEX.com, and that will get you my A to Z of Sex blog and my A to Z of Sex podcast, including now some of the more recent episodes that come from voiceamerica.com. Every Thursday night I do the A to Z of Sex on voiceamerica.com, Thursday night in the UK. Mm-hmm. It's 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time, 7 p.m. British time. Okay. And I do the show live usually. 90% of my shows are live. Okay. But they're evergreen there. And you can head over to my Patreon, and that is Lori Beth Bisbey on Patreon. And there you can find, you can find Dr. Bisbey's Erotic Library there, but you can also find that on my book website as well. So I think those are probably the main places. If you want 30 minutes with me, there's an easy link. It's bit.ly/30 minutes. And then Dr. Lori Beth, and you capitalize the D, the L, and the B.
Okay. A lot of stuff, but good stuff. Yep. Lori, I can't thank you enough, really. We this was so informative and so much fun, and we're going to do it again and again and again. We're going to call you every day, actually. And
I'm like, this is loads of fun for me. I love doing this, so feel free. And
it's wonderful, too, because what we did here, we started on our Studio Link interface, and then we were having a little problem there. So I called Lori up on the old Skype, and that's where I get to see her. So that's even better because she's so adorable, and I get to talk to her and make her blush a little bit by telling her how adorable she is. But it's true. I'm not lying. Lori, thank you so much. Thank you very, very much.
Bye-bye. Big kisses. Bye-bye.
I'll see you soon.
So that was the wonderful Dr. Lori Beth Bisbey. And she was something else, wasn't she, Chris? She has a lot of information.
Oh, she's a delight. We definitely got to get her back on again. She's really really fun.
Incredible information. And at the end of the show today, we're going to try to get on that last bumper, the show you were on with her show.
Yes.
And we'll get in there and get a lot. I mean, it's just really interesting. Her outlook is kind of what we've been talking about all along, about the gray areas, and and how people getting hung up on pronouncements that are made and taking that to be gospel now because they come across the internet and something. And I'm not damning the younger generation. That's not what it's about. I just think that we all need to maybe take a step back from being so rushed to judgment. There was a big, I don't know if you saw that, there was a big thing about the cancel culture recently and how people.
I'm actually pretty much I think people definitely need to be called out on things, especially when a good example is J.K. Rowling recently. Yeah. And, I think she deserves the backlash she's getting and, definitely should be boycotting her works because, that's just an abhorrent attitude. But, some people were like mentioning things like, dead authors. It's like, well, the whole point of the idea of this protest is, not supporting someone financially. So, if someone has passed on, I think we definitely need to call them on their shit. But, at the same time, it's like if you stop buying like, Mark Twain books, not that Mark Twain, deserves it because he's wonderful, but, it's like that's not going to serve anything. But, someone like Rowling, if you start saying it's like, look, you stupid idiot, we're going to, we're going to stop buying your books because you're a freaking bigot. I always think that's actually, something definitely to keep doing. But yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned about kids. And that's the other thing. It's like, it's such a myth. I think that people think, oh, the next generation is, going to be better because of like the internet and such. But, and once again, not sort of like, decrying everybody of a certain age. But, I mentioned that, what was it? God knows, 10, 20 years ago, I worked for did a short gig writing for AOL, and I answered kids' questions about sex.
Mhm.
And I have to say, the level of ignorance was scary.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not sure how young these kids were because it was a blind thing. You know, people would just send questions in and I would just answer them. But oh my God, the level of ignorance was really frightening.
Yeah, and I don't know. There's a couple things that always come up here. I think that it's so easy these days to say something, right, and it gets blasted, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
good or bad, or you want to backlash it, you want to slap the person back, or I mean whatever. It's and that leads very quickly to people giving their opinion or giving an opinion in general without people having the time maybe to take a step back and say, wait, all right, let's explore what that person said before we go
Mm-hmm.
there, and
Well, I think a lot of it also has to do with like how bad it is, and if it was simply a misstep. You know, if you say something that came out wrong and you realize it came out wrong, and a lot of it also do is what people react afterwards. I mean, just picking on Rowling again, instead of like taking a step back and apologizing or saying I apologize for hurting someone or doing this, she just doubled down and got worse. And I think that's something that I think people definitely need to call on. But if it's someone just simply a slip of the tongue or something they instantly regret and saying somewhere, or also once again, the context. I mean, we all grow as people. So, sometimes we make a mistake that was in the past. So you can't dredge up what someone said necessarily like 10, 20 years ago, unless once again, it's very egregious. I mean, if it's racial and sexual or, a slam against someone's orientation or ethnicity, then definitely they need to be called on it. But sometimes it's just a matter of like they've grown as a person. And also, once again, it depends on how people react to it. I mean, I remember reading how James Gunn, he's the director of, the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, had many, many years ago done stand-up and, done some very inappropriate jokes. And, he got called on it and he not really called on it, he apologized. Right. And said, I'm not that kind of person anymore, and I really apologize. And he made really good efforts. And then some, right-wing idiot, tried to make a stink about these things and got him fired from the new movie. But, he was always very clear, and he always owned up to making these comments. And what was really kind of cool is, Disney fired him, from the next Guardians movie, but then they rehired him mainly because he'd approached the situation very maturely. He hadn't complained. He hadn't gone on there and turned up the volume of what he said. He was just very, professional and very conscientious. So, and also he's always very upfront that he had made the comments. He never tried to hide them. And that's the thing. I think we all make mistakes, but it's like, how we process it says a lot. And a lot of these people who, and again, I keep picking on Rowling, she frankly deserves to be boycotted because she's a freaking bigot and won't even approach the whole subject, in any way that seems to be reasonable. But anyway, that's my little soapbox.
Yeah. And you know what? We differ in a lot in some things, you and I, not in our basic morality at all, which is good. And not in our praise for each other because we think each other are wonderful, and we're right. But
absolutely.
But there are places we do disagree, and that's that's fine. Because without that, man, the world is really kind of a boring place. My take is slightly different, but again, I think everybody's entitled to their opinion and to say or not say things about her that as they wish. As much as she could say what she said, you're free to say something against her or not. Either way. So I think that's wonderful. I think that's what we should be doing, right? I think that, and I also think that it's hard to make an overall objective statement on what's offensive and what isn't. Because certainly things that are offensive to you are not offensive to me, and vice versa. So I guess we could go with a cultural standard, which always, of course, moves and shifts as we supposedly evolve, but I think we're de-evolving more than we're evolving, actually, the way. So I think that within that context, I think that, and I also think at the end of the day, how no matter how abhorrent it is, you're entitled to your opinion, even if it's wackadoodle to you and me, right? It's like, sounds crazy. You are entitled to your opinion. You're also entitled to get a backlash about it if you put it out there. And it's and it's not, it's a little unusual or seemingly offensive to some people. As much as you think you have your right to espouse it, and you do, don't be surprised that there's going to be other people who have something to say, good and bad, So I think I like the fact I've always been one of those people, like, let's put it all out there. Even the stuff that I don't even want to hear, put it all out there, because that makes it at least out there. At least we can see it and hear it, right? The stuff that's scary is the insidious stuff you don't hear and see, and you're wondering, what, how that's going to get to us, right? And that's the stuff I get scared about, there's a lot of stuff that's going on around us at all times, like Lori was saying. There's a lot of misinformation as well. People just throw things out there on the web or on a Twitter feed and think, well, that's the truth then. I just said it. And I'm like, and then a couple people catch it and say, that's the truth. And I'm like, well, there's no basis for that,
Yep.
And it's kind of weird how that happens. But, we are living in that age where we're getting information in a blistering fast pace. And we have to all, but I think you would agree, though, that at the end of the day, if first and foremost, we all need to tend to our own garden, right? Because that's
I agree.
That's the most important thing.
Oh, I completely agree, and I agree with you that we don't have to agree on everything, and that's the whole point of this. I mean, you have to have different opinions. I think that sometimes, though, it's like, if it's a straight up bigoted statement, that's different. I mean, an opinion is one thing, but I've often thought about why we're having this huge, alternate reality nonsense right now. And I think a lot of it has to do, frankly, and this is going to sound weird because I'm such a proponent of technology and I love the internet, and I think it's made the world a better place. But I think that, we have a lot of people who got used to the illusion of, information. Like, before the internet, it was books and magazines and television. Not that they were accurate, but everyone just sort of like has this inherent trust. And I think that trust was misplaced because we've had the same bias in all of these things that we've always had. But now
I totally agree with
it's
that.
like everyone has this view of, if I read it, it's true.
Yeah, right.
And
which before
they sort of
never
extrapolated this. They've kind of extrapolated this thing. Well, if Walter Cronkite said it's true, therefore it's true. Therefore, everything that shows up in front of my face has to be true.
Yes.
So we've kind of lost a lot of those critical thinking skills. And I still am amazed when someone chirps up some opinion or some bias, and it was all based on a Facebook meme or something stupid like
Lori
that.
Said,
I mean,
right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and you're right, because back in the day, and you have to be old enough to remember that, Walter Cronkite, who came on, I guess he came on 6:30 or 7 o'clock each night. I don't know the time. He gave a half an hour newscast where he just sat there and looked at the camera and spoke, right? And he was the gold standard as far as if it came from his mouth, you knew it was, you just assumed it was true. He was like the wise old man. And but like Chris said, even then there were biases everywhere in the news media. So I don't know if you could trust anything more then than you can now. I just think now there's such huge leaps of truths that you can't even call them truths. But I mean, I guess in some way it's good because, like I said, you're finding out very quickly where it's coming from, where the sources are, and all that kind of stuff. But I like the last couple years in the mistrust of the Fourth Estate, the press. I don't find that very unusual because I never trusted the press to begin with anyway. I was like, is anybody surprised that you can't, that some of the stuff coming out is garbage? I don't know anybody's surprised about that. Being fiction writers, we're used to that, So
absolutely,
it's just strange. I don't know.
And if anything, I think we actually have some better sources now because a lot of these places have sort of taken up the mantle. Because it used to be the Fourth Estate was like this, very serious thing, but now it's like you can't really. There's certain news sources that are better than others. Fox being the worst, and other ones being slightly better. But I do like the fact that we're seeing sort of like this kind of self-policing thing now. Like I live and die for Snopes, for instance.
Right.
If anybody doesn't know, it's Snopes.com, and it's a bunch of volunteers who fact check, a lot of things. So if someone reads something, they can send it to Snopes, and Snopes, if you get enough people that are interested, will debunk it or say it's true or say it's partially true or something somewhere. But there's other ones who have a little bit higher journalistic integrity. So, but the problem is, it's like a lot of these things are still clickbait. I mean, the same way that it used to be like, hey, there's 7 things in your home that can kill you. Here they are after the break. And, we still have a lot of that floating around. Some people, though, I think are, trying to be better about it. I mean, there's some good sex education resources, like Sexpert, which is our friend Domina does that one. And, Tickle.life was another one. And there's like San Francisco sex information and all this kind of stuff. So there's really good, valuable resources. But the problem is, it's like you need to reach out to these places. So if you're, completely ignorant, you're not going to often people don't want to try and not be ignorant. They just simply perpetuate it and keep looking for things online that sort of boast, their own ignorance, which is really infuriating.
And you follow that rabbit hole,
Exactly.
I know for a fact that the facts on Wikipedia cannot be trusted on a regular basis. And the reason that is because anybody can post to Wikipedia. And I mean, I know for a fact because in one of my jobs when I work for Vintage Rock, a lot of time I'll come up to an interview with somebody, an older, more mature rock star. And I've either know them or bolster up on the facts or kind of try to find out as much I can. But there's many a times that Wikipedia will say something about their third album or their, their tour, and it's complete abject bullshit. And you get the person, on the phone, or you talk to them in person, and they're like, "Look, I don't know what to tell you, but that's a rumor that's been going around for years, and he didn't play guitar on that record, and Wikipedia says he did, and it's not true." So, but people go to Wikipedia thinking that's the source for facts, and they do that. When there's a site like Snopes is probably a little bit better because they do as much as they can deep diving on those stories. But there are times when I've seen them say, look, we're not really sure. There's like a middle ground sometimes that they go, could be, could not be. We don't really know. So at least when you're being a little like honest like that, you say, look, there's times we don't really know, But that's the problem with it, just because the facts are, this is it, kids. If the facts, if somebody says it on Facebook, don't trust it. If somebody says it on Wikipedia, don't trust it. If somebody says it on Twitter, go look. Like Chris has said, you're looking for some sexual information, go to these well-known sources, but go there yourself. Do the research yourself. Reach out to the scientists and people like Dr. Lori and look into it and ask the questions directly so you get the right information, because man, there's some bad information out there.
Oh, absolutely. And I agree about Wikipedia. I mean, I think I like Wikipedia myself because, it sort of like covers a wide variety of subject, and they do self-police trying to make it as accurate as possible. But the problem is some articles don't get policed as well as others.
That's true.
So, certain things like that have a scientific basis, they have a great deal of, people giving feedback. For the other things are not. So I always consider like a jumping off point. So, if you go to Wikipedia and you find something interesting, don't just consider the door is shut on the issue. Instead, considering it like, well, now this is a place where I can start doing my own research.
That's a good point.
But again, of course, it's like going to the right places.
Well, the Library of Alexandria doesn't exist anymore. So, you're trying, but and because we are who we are and the stuff we write, we certainly are always open to opinions, even if they're abhorrent to ours, and we like a bunch of information, and we like a lot of stuff out there to read and get into. And you look across our good friend Bridget's site with hot movies. There's a ton of stuff there, and that's good. That's good that you have an array of porn to check out if you want. It's a wonderful thing, because I think at the end of the day, the stuff rises to the top or it doesn't. There's a lot of garbage out there too, in all ways. But it becomes popular because the audience wants it. you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
I particularly love it when I get, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I would say I particularly love it when someone fact checks me. I mean, I try and be as accurate as possible when I'm doing a nonfiction piece, but sometimes my information is a little out of date or, something similar. And I just had an article recently and someone mentioned that there's I keep talking about safe, sane, and consensual when it comes to sex. And someone pointed out, not necessarily an alternative, but something a little bit more modern terminology. I thought, well, that's cool. I'm glad someone caught that or the editor changed it. But yeah, it's it's an ongoing process. That's the other thing. It's what we know from one day to another, there's always something new to learn. And, that's a lot of issues around things, particularly around science and history. It's when you grow up, you always can't get this impression of that's the way it is because we taught that. But, information is always being updated and reevaluated and new evidence is being added to it. So you can't just rest on your laurels. You can't just say, well, I learned this in high school, therefore it's true, because 90% of the time what your teacher taught you has been thrown out.
Yeah, and that's the scientific method, right? Always to question, keep questioning, right? I mean, trying to poke holes in it until you can't, and you realize, okay, this might be true for the moment, Yep.
And not wandering too much down this rabbit hole because I think we're getting towards the end here. But that's the other thing. It's when you talk about things like science, particularly. I mean, it's funny because certain things are opinion. And that's just usually things like, art, history, and so forth. Like you like one thing, I don't know. That's fine. That's opinion. But when you get down to the scientific aspects, that's when things get really interesting because, as you mentioned before, the scientific method is, and I'm going to mumble this horribly, I know, but it's observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and something I can't remember exactly. I'm embarrassed to say that because we're talking about education. I should just be looking it up. Right. But the idea is, again, it's self-checking. So you have a theory, you back it up, you test, you observe, you do an experiment, you make a hypothesis, you do an experiment, and then you send that out into the world. Other people do it as well, and they then either get the same result, which is fantastic, you got a little feather in your cap, and science moves forward, or you get a negative, and we have to reevaluate that thing. But that's something we don't have a lot of in other things. Unfortunately, people just simply say, "Oh, this is the way I believe," and they move on from there. Without actually doing the research or looking it up or something similar. So it can be very infuriating. But, science is another one where, it's been reevaluated and changed over the years so many times. I mean, how we used to believe one thing and now it's oh, sorry, we were wrong. We learned since then.
Right. It's funny. Have you read, and I know you've had, and I guess we can end it here because this will be a fun little geek moment for us both. But I'm rereading Sheckley's Immortality, Inc.
Oh, I love Sheckley. Sheckley's wonderful.
Now, Robert Sheckley is one of those. He's an odd duck in the science fiction world because he writes a lot of satirical science fiction, which is an unusual bent. Not many science fiction writers write that directly. Some fell into it by what they were doing, but Sheckley's, and he wrote this thing called Immortality, Inc. And it's very famous. And in it, like Chris was saying, what happens is a man from the past is plucked out of the past into the future. And because science has changed so much, the views on death and immortality are all different and wacky, And what Sheckley is really saying is what Chris is saying right now, which is our perceptions change as we get more information, right? I mean, we learn things that aren't true anymore. But Sheckley's take on it, of course, is just mind-boggling, silly, and he's having a good time with that concept. Like the things we learn are things that are even crazier, The truth we learn is even more wacky than we thought, And that's the whole, I guess, if you're going to take away one thing from this episode, because we were talking to a scientist today, right? And you can take one thing away from this episode is that, things are ever evolving and we should be ever questioning. Don't you think, Chris?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just don't take things at face value and do your research. And again, talk to people who actually know something on the subject. It's when a lot of people think that because they have an opinion, that's somehow or I read it on Facebook, therefore I'm an expert. It's just right. Do I trust someone who is a, maybe like a shoe salesman on their opinions on sex or sexuality, or do I talk to someone who's been researching the field for 30 freaking years? I mean, guess what? Talk to the person who's doing the research for that long. Right. So yeah, it's you can have your opinion, but when you start promoting it as facts, you'd better be able to back the damn thing up.
Yeah, and when it comes to sexuality, it's nice to have a little facts at your disposal, because then, like Lori said, you could move forward in an informed way, which is going to be good for everybody. It's healthy for everybody. You know?
Absolutely.
Chris, as always, it's been, the hour flies, and I can't say I have a great time with you all the time. We whether we're in person,
always delightful.
Phone, if we're email, it doesn't matter. We just think that the dickens of each other. That's all.
Absolutely.
Say,
it's always delightful, Ralphie.
Really
it's always an
is.
absolute delight. And even though we might disagree on some things, I think we're just like, we're still best buds, and this is like, what makes us so much delightful, and it's like always a delight, always wonderful.
Course. And this show's been always a delight. This licking non-vanilla thing that we're doing, we're having a great time, and I think we're gaining listeners by the show, which is great.
Cool.
And we're going far and wide into the world, which is nice. Our producer's letting us know that we're stretching ourselves a little bit across the world, which is nice. And we're very happy about that. And when you get a chance, read the blog too. That's on the Licking Non-Vanilla website. There's a lot of information there in the blog, and that'll get you to the podcast. That's all over the place. But Chris, thank you once again for a great time. Thank you, Dr. Lori, and we'll give you all her information too when the show goes up. So this has been Licking Non-Vanilla with me, Ralph Greco Jr. and
Chris, otherwise known as M. Christian.
And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, Chris. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And visit us on the web at www.lickingnonvanilla.com.